Thank you all. Apologies to some of you who have heard this already, so please bear with me. Hopefully there's a bit of background for those who I haven't met yet or talked Omero with. But what I wanted to start with is that I am a core director at UNC Chapel Hill, and we are a training-based, user-based core. So we have people come in, we do consultations, we train them how to use the microscope, and then most of the time they're collecting data is when we are not present with them. So we are slightly different than Valeria's instance, and I want to tell you about how we went through getting Omero at then UNC. All right, so this started with one of our main users having a grant called Brady. So I am in the Neuroscience Center, and one of our users had a pilot project with multiple core facilities, including 2 different light microscopy facilities, because we are departmental still at UNC for our core infrastructure, and a small animal MRI. And then multiple different PIs and cyber infrastructure specialists, including the Renaissance Computing Institute, or RENCI, which had been referenced previously. And what they were interested in is counting every single nuclei in a mouse brain, back to multiple and hundreds of mouse brains, and looking at how microcephaly develops in dead species of embryonic brains. So we wanted every single depth and nuclei present. So what they started was a interaction with iRods, which is housed at UNC, but as Katerina had mentioned, operates in a consortium-based model. And what they were saying is that instead of going from our local microscope to a local compute cluster, we could do a federated model. Right? And most people wanted at the time was to put everything in the cloud. With these giant data sets, we didn't have the compute to support that, and we're worried that the data would get stuck there. And so we thought of a more distributed model where we would have multiple iRods instances enabling different proprietary or compute use nodes, and that this could then be accessed across different areas. So the idea here was that we could get data in using iRods, and this would then alert people to having different resources, different permissions, and different apps. And in this case, think of Omero as an on the iRod side. Apparently, I'm very strong with my keys. And on the other side, people could use it for metadata searching and could execute more functions on it without actually locally downloading it in an extra step. Now, this was a short-term grant, but enabled us to start things like bringing in Katerina early in, where we sat and she told us about Omero and said that this may be a way to help be essentially an app, as iRods was thinking about it, for storing data and visualizing it. So as we went along, we implemented 2 different nodes. And one of these was in our core, where we had a Linux machine that ran iRods as well as other Linux functions, and allowed people to import data into this iRods federated system. Then we had an iRods node at School of Med IT, which connected to our high compute cluster and enabled them to send jobs from there without a separate user-based interaction. And we had a final one, which was really for storage. And this allowed us to have a bit of a sandbox because we didn't have the space at either of those other 2 nodes to store much data. So as we were doing this project, we decided to take a 2-pronged approach. One was a sandbox that that IT called, where I was allowed to play with open source Omero on an extra computer that they had lying around because they thought this was an interesting project. And that one I could break and I could try different things and see what we really thought the main use case would be. And then we had a different one that was housed at School of Med. That was our official pilot project. And for that, I was really controlling access. I really only wanted data sets of a certain size, and wanted to develop an array of data that I could control, the input and ingest to, that people weren't going to start running jobs that would break our compute very quickly, and to demonstrate to IT that we did have some engaged user base that wasn't going to break things as soon as we put it on a bigger structure. So that sandbox, again, I'm not gonna go into this, but allowed us to try different things, and figure out that things like the Cell Profiler add-on would be very beneficial for us, especially because in the graduate courses that I teach, it was a way to onboard people and teach them the benefit when they were just getting introduced to image analysis. But we didn't have a current integration to the high compute cluster that didn't require user interface. However, IT liked that because it could be charged directly to the PI and went through them. And so I was also okay with that, as I didn't want to enter into the area of owning data. And so this did keep it separate, although wasn't maybe our ideal implementation. Our pre-production server used UNC login, had a compute node and a visualization node, but it was pretty limited. And so I had to promise them that I wasn't going to break it, that we weren't using it for light sheet yet, but that I could use it as a test bed, because I could tell them immediately once I open this door, we have these users who have this amount of data, but I won't let them break the system yet. We did get Cell Profiler and Path Viewer add-ons, and that was important for us because we did have a lot of whole slide imaging, and that was generally bigger than most users could view on their own desktops. So again, I very tightly controlled the number of active users in our pre-production server and the type of data that we were allowed to do. So we had a few trial data showing that we could import behavioral data, other videos, MRI, but we did not currently have core ingest from those yet. And that convinced, after a few years, IT that we had a system that could be developed longer term, and eventually led to our OmeroPlus integration, which happened multiple years later in 2022, after there was the called the big sale on OmeroPlus at the end of that year. And UNC is, I would say, a risk-averse institution. Some of you might be familiar with that. And so the idea that they were going to miss out on a big sale financially was actually a prime motivating factor. So we were able to get that in right at the end of 2022. And that was generated from internal funds and the funds that we had already placed. And so that was shared by the School of Medicine, cancer centers, multiple departments, and the School of Medicine ITS. I will note that I got multiple emails saying that I was double dipping. I was arguing the same users to multiple different groups. But again, the fact that the NIH was pushing this and we were looking for a school possible system was helped. And in the end, the purchase went through ITS, our IT services, and was housed there, although I was officially the PI on the purchase. Now we have multiple hundreds of users, multiple cores starting to use this to onboard people, and about 10 terabytes in data. We have promised up to 100, but they will only add it as we get to a certain portion of space. And that I grew to like, because that took a few instances to develop as well, where we had to copy and redo the system a few times. So now we know we have a growable base without losing information. Our main eager adopters were early PIs who had a lot of turnover in their labs, and they really liked having permanent access, early access to that data, and they started using Omero Figure as well, and they saw it as a good way to onboard early people to their labs. Technicians and students also really liked it. and some eager early students then brought it to their labs. But what we found really worked was incorporating it during my first consultation with people when I'm talking about responsibilities and policies and data management. And I tell them, I have them log in, this is what you'll have access to. We'll show you this after your first training session. You're not required to use it, but it is now available to you as a second option for whatever you were already planning to do your data storage in. And we've seen that grow quite a bit, especially for the people who were not going to be downloading something like BG or ImageJ. I was going to talk very briefly about iRods and Omero, but I think the other thing that's important to note on that more production server side is that relationships are really important at UNC, and having people in the same room that were both investigators, in our case, our data management centers and IT was key, but also having an alumni or alumnus of UNC integrated into Glencoe certainly helped alleviate some of the nervousness that UNC would have had otherwise. And so I don't know about your institution, but UNC is one that takes a bit of time, a little bit of not breaking things to grow, and knowing that others have done this in the past successfully was useful for me. We're still working on iRods and Omero integration, and I just wanted to throw this out there since this had been discussed early. So iRods, we're thinking, could help provide the policy that Omero does not natively have. So this could provide our local namespaces and metadata catalogs, and allow us to do things like, in order to be saved permanently on UNC's file space, you must have this information attached to your data. And so that IT is interested in working with us with, and iRods is, because then we have a larger user base for them. After a lot of conversations between Josh and Terrell, who is the current iRods, I don't know if it's CEO or lead, is that a tight integration would require a lot of time and knowledge, and we didn't have current people to put on that project, but a loose integration could be much faster. And in this case, we're thinking of things as apps that each other run. So there is a current working group. It's been up for an embarrassing number of years, and hosted up on Terrell's GitHub. And you can check different notes that when this meets, and if anybody wants to try some things, there's a lot of notes there, and many of you have joined at various points these meetings, but the goal is to eventually be able to integrate both as an API of each other and determine which works best for whichever institution you happen to be at. So I just wanted to throw this up there as things that I would love to discuss more with you all. I know some of you have talked your ear off already. I'm really trying to get a public-facing Omero linked to UNC's system like Valeria has. We don't have that yet, and what they really want to do is launch it as an app. So it won't have all of Omero's data saving features or download, but it would allow visualization, and then for you to query and say, I want to download this data set. And then that would be handled separately with different permissions. We'd love to have more of an automated ingest. I think that has slowed some of our implementation to the production server. For example, taking the stitched file only and removing the raw files to longer term storage, just cleaning things up. And we don't have a beautiful naming structure like was shown by Judith. And so it can be quite random, and that will lead to different amounts of functionality. We'd love to implement different QC indicators. As I was talking with people at breakfast, we are very reward motivated. And so our students would love a green to yellow to red, although red might be a little aggressive, indicator, right, of data quality. And our PIs would love that, right? Which data set should I start to work my analysis on? Which is representative versus best? And is there a way that I can quickly monitor if the data we're inputting is likely to be useful? And then we have a light sheet pathway, and we're very interested in that. And so I just wanted to throw this up there. This is what we've been spending a lot of time working on. We have a dual illumination light sheet system, which I thought would be a really fun pet project. and has allowed us to keep coming to IT with different challenges where we eventually have data sets that are multiple terabytes in size and need a multiple terabyte or tens of terabytes sandbox for production and analysis. And we think that iRods and Omero together could help us manage this much, much better. That's it, except for all of my thanks to all of you, and of course, everybody who helps support the